Dr. Bose Ravenel is a permanent board certified pediatrician by the American Board of Pediatrics. Dr. Ravenel is a distinguished pediatrician repeatedly recognized as one of the best doctors in America prior to his retirement in March of 2020. He received his medical degree from Duke University and trained in pediatrics at Johns Hopkins Hospital. Dr. Ravenel was a major in the U.S. Army, serving as the staff pediatrician in Fort Jackson, South Carolina, and he spent 11 years in academia as a clinical professor. He co-authored a book called The Diseasing of America's Children, Exposing the ADHD Fiasco and Empowering Parents to Take Back Control. It provides parents with the ammunition they need to protect their children against the medicalization of children with pseudoscientific diagnoses such as attention deficit disorder, hyperactive disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, etc. We're honored to have you with us. Please come.
Thank you for your kind introduction. I really am excited to be here. Let me get this. Hang on. They must be coming after us. It's up there. I'm going to go ahead and get started on the introduction part. First of all, I'm honored to be here. Our family roots are here. My father was born in 1898 in Green Pond down the road. My son was in med school here. Three of us, Ravenels, have practiced pediatrics combined 100 years in 2024. My own background, private practice, 31 years, 11 years academics, and culminated my career in 6 years of integrated medicine, during which time I learned more and helped more people get better than ever in my 41 years previously. I don't know why the Lord let me wander into mainstream wilderness for 41 years. That's 1 year longer than Moses did. But in any case, I'm honored to be here. A disclosure, I'm a retired pediatrician. Nothing I say is intended to construe recommendation to take or not take any treatment or vaccine. My remarks and my presentation will be completely in the terms, perspective of informed consent, providing information which has largely been censored by an illegal and inappropriate process systemically in America since the pandemic started 3 years ago. I will go ahead and start without slides if necessary, because my overall conclusion is that I'm going to present the case that COVID vaccines for children and adolescents, there is no rational argument or any scientific data that can justify giving any currently available COVID vaccine under any circumstances, period. risk of serious illness, according to the CDC, in the slide, which is unfortunately not visible, is 0.00004 zeros too. 20 cases, 20 per million is the risk of death from COVID in children in 2021, according to the CDC. And that was their own figure, mid-2021. And furthermore, that translates into a survival rate of 99.9999% with no treatment at all. The sad reality is that the children are at minimal risk of serious illness or disease or death from COVID itself. And the second thing is that early treatment is and was available by mid-2021. And by the way, my entire presentation is based largely on data up to 2022, summer of 2022, when I went to Pennsylvania and had the honor and privilege of representing a family, a mother, who was fighting off the vaccines for her adolescent sons. That was an event where the judge was known to be in favor of the vaccination, but after presenting to the opposing counsel an expert witness in that case, the information that I was prepared to testify on, that late the evening prior to the scheduled courtroom, they conceded and allowed the children to make their decision, which was known not to take the vaccine. So this is largely the white paper from which that came, with a few more supplements since then. Is that on? Okay, put it up here. So I think we have covered the first 4 or 5 slides. Background, all that. So the vaccines are unnecessary. Deaths and serious illness are very low. I just explained that. And I also point out that everything that I'm talking about is referenced in the white paper, which is available to anybody who wishes to have it, and plus some more references that and on the slides, when there's a reference written out there, it's usually because I've added it on since last summer. But all the numbers that are here have only gotten exponentially worse in terms of adverse effects, and benefits are still lacking. So safe, effective treatment was available. Multi-component sequenced early therapy published in 2 major journals by Dr. Peter McCullough in 2021. And since March of 2020, Drs. Brian Tyson and George Fareed in the hot zone in California wrote a book where it outlined their experience with 7,000 patients who were treated early in that hot zone area. And they only had 2 hospitalized patients and no deaths out of 7,000 patients. And that's consistent with the data that I said the CDC knew back in 2021 that the risk of dying from COVID was 0.00002, 20 per million, 0 to 17 years old. Children rarely transmit COVID-19 infection to adults outside the home. This is from the AAP Journal, Pediatrics, August 1st, 2020. COVID transmission in children, the child is not to blame. This was a commentary based upon an article in that issue, along with 4 other studies in the issue that examined COVID transmission by children. And it was negligible, it was almost non-existent. Natural immunity is superior to vaccine-induced immunity. Prospective Italian study of family clusters basically showed that sustained immune response in children up to 1 year after infection, 98% asymptomatic or mild. Sustained antibody levels were found. Immune response in 91 children, 154 adults after mild or asymptomatic infection. Antibody and cellular response twice as high in children, stable beyond 12 months. Also substantial cross-reactivity, cross-protection from natural infection, not the vaccines, from other strains. Immune systems impaired from mRNA vaccines. This is an article in Virology Journal June 2022, Yamamoto. Spike protein, largely responsible for the SARS-CoV-2 pathological effect, circulate through the body over 4 months. Lipid nanoparticles accumulate in the liver, spleen, adrenals, and ovaries. And since that time, they've been found to discriminate through the entire body, including the brain. Vascular endothelial cells are damaged by the circulating spike protein, therefore come in myocarditis. Antibody-dependent enhancement can reduce the neutralizing antibody, which is a form that effectively tries to prevent a worse disease and transmission. And exacerbates it. Therefore, individuals who are vaccinated actually are at more risk from COVID and more serious illness if they get it, which we have seen massively all over the world. Hospitalizations and deaths are greater. COVID vaccines are ineffective for prevention of infection or transmission. First, despite early aggressive public health messaging that keep you from getting infected and protect others around you, for which there was no data to support, more recent data have virtually eliminated even the claim. The vaccine proponent side rarely even mentions now preventing infection or spread because they know it doesn't. And it's overwhelmingly obvious that that's true and always was true. So they shifted to the message, which is false also. Well, it reduces hospitalization and death. It actually increases both. Ineffective prevention, slide 2. Data was published in the CDC's MMWR demonstrating that the Delta infection resulted in similarly high viral loads in vaccinated and unvaccinated people. That was a quote. Another moment of confusion when Rochelle Lewinsky, the previous CDC director herself, but was told CNN that vaccines don't prevent transmission of COVID at all, and they never did. Hospitalizations. Hospitalizations and deaths are greater among the vaccinated than the unvaccinated. Canadian government analysis of cases, basically 93, 85, and 92% were fully vaccinated in terms of cases, hospitalizations, and deaths, respectively. The UK, Government of Office Statistics, data from June 21 to May 22, 85% were vaccinated. And in the United States, the data is compromised by the CDC manipulation of data, which we will come back to in the second slide following. CDC manipulation of data, deaths in the vaccinated are less, they declared that in the vaccinated only, deaths less than 14 days following shots are called unvaccinated. And the majority of adverse effects, serious ones and death, occur within 2 weeks of the vaccination. I mean, it's astounding that they would do that and admit it. So the data, the canard about it's an pathogen, an epidemic of unvaccinated, it is an almost historical blunder. I can't even comprehend the magnitude of the deception. So the deaths in the vaccinated, less than 14 days, hospital system data on vaccination status is passive. They have to report, it's an onerous system to report. Nurse whistleblowers have confirmed that hospitals actually threaten to fire them if they report these things. That's been documented. Routine testing for COVID-19 with PCR cycles at 28 or lower among the vaccinated, but the CDC allowed 37 to 40 cycle for unvaccinated, which produces an artificial appearance of pandemic with the unvaccinated. So it's a manipulated system to give the illusion of that. But it's more recent data in the U.S. actually show the truth, and it's become obvious that it's true. U.S. data on, quote, breakthrough COVID infections, i.e. vaccinated people. The myth of the pandemic of the unvaccinated. May 1st, 2021, CDC announced a transition from monitoring all reported vaccine breakthrough cases to focus on identifying and investigating only hospitalized fatal cases. So only in the vaccinated, they wanted to stop focusing on these things. Barnstable County, Massachusetts, outbreak, vaccinated, unvaccinated, had the same CT values, meaning the infectious degree was the same. And internal CDC presentation in July of 2021 reported showed that the vaxxed and unvaxxed were equally capable of transmission. Absolute risk reduction versus relative risk. Raise your hand if you've ever heard anyone mention the absolute risk reduction versus relative risk reduction. One. Is that it? Two. And it's the biggest trick ever devised in humanity, in medicine. Example, efficacy of these vaccines. That's all you hear, 95%, 98%, 80%. The efficacy drops from 50 to 30%. 30% sounds pretty good, you know? But listen to this, hypothetical example. 10,000 given a vaccine compared to 10,000 people a control or dummy saline injection. Outcome data based on number of infections over 4 months. And let's assume that the 10,000 cases, the 10,000 given the vaccine and the 10,000 no vaccine, 100 cases occurred in placebo as opposed to 10 among the vaccinated. That would be a 90% relative risk reduction. True factual presentation. But that's only useful for population discussion. On the other hand, that same theoretical numbers, if you reduce the cases from 100 to 10, that's a 90% relative reduction, but it's 90 cases per 10,000 treated, which is 9 per 1,000 treated, and that is 0.9%, less than 1%. And in fact, the actual Pfizer and Moderna data, the original data, where the EUA was granted, Pfizer data reported to show RR relative risk of 95%. Sounds good. But the absolute risk was only 0.7%. So less than 1 out of 100 people who got the vaccine would not get a case of COVID, which today is like a cold. This is just astonishing. And then the Moderna was similar. RR was 94%, AR was 1.1%. So in the future, ask your physician about what is the absolute risk reduction. They look at you with cross eyes. They won't know what you're talking about. And it's pitiful that the lay public now knows more about how to interpret informed consent, and the doctors don't know anything about it. It's astonishing. Even the infectious disease experts, I'd love to ask them. I'll bet you none of them even know what it is. I'm passionate, by the way, if you hadn't figured it out. The US FDA published guidelines for communicating risk and benefits. They have a document, I have a copy of it, and it specifically says in providing informed consent to individuals, it is imperative to use the absolute risk reduction. It is never done. I've never heard it being done. Historically high adverse events, including deaths. Data here were mid-2022, they've gotten much worse since. But by 2022, first half, deaths following COVID vaccines reported in VAERS over 18 months at that time, greater than the total number of deaths following all vaccines for 32 years pre-pandemic. 30,450 deaths post-COVID vaccine versus 874 for all other vaccines. Past outbreaks, new vaccines, 25 or 50 deaths, pulled completely forever. Now we have, in the United States alone, there were 14,000 at that point. The numbers are gigantic. They're like 30,000 now in the United States. 30,000 deaths following the vaccines. And so the mainstream, the pro-vaccine people tend to say, well, deaths following COVID vaccine doesn't prove the vaccine caused it. And they're correct. It does not, that fact alone. However, COVID vaccine, the marked clustering of deaths closer to vaccination completely supports it, because if these were only random coincidental events, there'd be a random coincidence, no consistent difference in terms of how soon after the vaccination. And the VAERS data show that 20% of all the deaths occur within 48 hours, 30.62% within 7 days, and 53% within 60 days. So, and then myocarditis. COVID vaccines increase myocarditis 83-fold compared to the background rate in adolescent males, according to 2 May 2022 studies. Quote, some vaccine proponents argue that myocarditis cases are mild, but Krug et al. In European Journal of Clinical Investigation from the VAERS data found that 86.9% of cases in adolescents were hospitalized. And bear in mind that people like Dr. Fauci, Dr. Science, and others who articulate these dramatic things that are not true, they almost never refer to any data source. They just say these things. If you look at the data, it's compelling. Some vaccine components, the CDC VAERS data showed an increase in myocarditis in young patients from fewer than 162 yearly from 2020 to 2020 over 10 years, compared to 29,432 in 2021 alone, and 21,000 by mid-2022. 21,000 cases. Fertility, sudden deaths among athletes. It's now become, quote, the new normal. Athletes just dropping dead or collapsing, being resuscitated. A 206 study found 1,001 sudden deaths among athletes less than 35 years old, averaging 2.3 a month. GoodScience.com reports 673 deaths from January 2021 to April 2022 during the vaccine campaign, averaging 42 a month. So the cases of sudden death, athletes dropping dead, increased from 2 a month to 42 a month. That was in 2022. It's even more dramatic now. So we can say that 1,100 deaths occurred over 39 years, while we had 671 by mid-2022 over just 16 months of the vaccine campaign. mRNA and viral vector DNA vaccines can encode changes in DNA. And for time, I won't read this all, but it has been documented that what's called reverse transcription, which means genetic material from something is translocated into cells, has been shown in test tube data on liver cells in humans following vaccination. Fertility considerations in males and females. Impaired semen concentration, total mobile sperm count were reported in June of 2022 issue of Andrology to be significantly lower following only 2 doses of the Pfizer vaccine. A study reported that 42% of women with regular menstrual cycles were having more heavily bleeding following vaccination. Miscarriages, fetal deaths, stillbirths skyrocketed following the COVID vaccine rollout. November 2021, Lionsgate Hospital, North Vancouver, BC, delivered 13 stillborn babies in a 24-hour period. Every one of them received the COVID vaccine. Multiple countries reporting the same thing, sudden declines in birth rates. So my conclusion, as I said in the beginning, no rational argument or any scientific data can justify giving any child or adolescent any current COVID vaccine under any circumstance. I would say that to anybody, anywhere, anytime. A large and growing mass of compelling data indicates minimal, if any, clinical benefit while posing unprecedented, historic risk. Effective, safe, inexpensive, and widely available treatment, despite the world trying desperately in courtrooms to forbid using it, which is criminal, is available for rare cases of more severe illness. And I'm going to conclude with a few comments about masks. Masks are equally absurd. Not for everybody. Masks do nothing good and huge harm. What's the data? Decades-long consensus, they're not effective. Dr. Fauci said that in the beginning of the pandemic, until he changed his mind again, and changed it again. And it went to 1 mask, 2 masks, 3 masks, a box of masks, back to no masks. round and round it goes and where it stops, like musical chairs. At the onset of the pandemic, suddenly, this mandates followed. No data to support mandates, legally doubtful, but money, fear-mongering, and control are involved. In the case of children and adolescents, great harm and no benefits. The Association of American Physicians and Surgeons has an incredible resource, Mass Facts, Marilyn Singleton, MD, JD. She's an attorney and a physician. Findings from a large number of theoretical animal and human studies, including a January 2023 Cochrane review, used to be the uncompromised gold standard of objectivity, still better than the rest, but not completely reliable. At least 60 studies and reports of harms from mask wearing by December 2021. Brownstone Institute, Paul Alexander, December 2021 article, 170 studies and articles on mask ineffectiveness and harms. The source presents a hyperlink and summary statements for each of the 61 harms. And the next slide, mask benefits, none to wearers, huge funds of money for manufacturers, power and control over citizens for politicians, PSYOP value of conditioning the populace to blind compliance, which violates informed consent as there are harms and no benefits. Mask harms, 61 studies and reports in the AAPS statement, include among them hinder speech and language development in children, potential emotional and intellectual development, adverse effects. Experimental data shows carbon dioxide content of exhaled air far above limits of acceptability according to the FDA. Pathogens on face masks. A report of a 4-year-old who almost died from a bacterial lung infection. Oxygenation impairment causing headaches, nausea, fatigue, concentration impairment. Potential risk from chemicals, chlorines, polyester, microplastic components on the face mask. And finally, face masks by governors. North Carolina's Governor Cooper had a mask mandate. It was challenged by people in the state, and they insisted on some responses. So that then North Carolina HHS Secretary Mandy Cohen, who is now, by the way, the CDC director, they produced 22 studies purportedly to support the mask mandate. The John Locke Foundation did an in-depth analysis of all 22 studies, and not one contained any unequivocal data to support mask mandates. That's the state of the, quote, science in the mainstream world today, and it's still the same. But I go back to the saying that we are a part, everybody in this room either is or is potentially in a part of a process to create a complete, total parallel medical system where doctors can be doctors, patients can be patients, you can get early treatment, and you don't have to be given things and you get informed consent. Informed consent is pretty much history in the mainstream world of medicine. That's the end of my presentation.